The stone walls of the most famous palaces in the world are built to keep secrets in just as much as they are built to keep the outside world out. For centuries, the British royal household has operated under a strict code of absolute discretion, managing crises behind closed doors and ensuring that the public only sees what the institution deems acceptable. But every so often, the heavy curtains of royal privilege are pulled back by the cold hands of legal reality, exposing a reality that no amount of public relations can easily fix. Today, a quiet but devastating storm is gathering over the crown, originating not from sudden headlines, but from an old paper trail that has slowly wound its way through the highest levels of British authority. It is a story about hidden digital archives, confidential state documents, and an institutional silence that has lasted for years, raising deep questions about accountability at the absolute top of society. As we begin to untangle this complex web of privilege and secrecy, please take a brief moment to support our independent journalism by subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss our deep investigative reports. The unfolding situation involves thousands of pieces of communication that were reportedly handed over to royal officials a long time ago, suggesting that the inner circle of the monarchy was aware of a gathering legal crisis long before the public ever caught wind of it. To understand how we arrived at this moment of unprecedented institutional tension, we have to look back at the quiet legal battles that have been playing out in high courts and private offices, far away from the cameras. For a long time, the public narrative surrounding the controversial figures within the royal family was focused primarily on personal associations and individual moral failures. However, the latest revelations shift the focus away from personal choices and place it squarely on structural misconduct and the potential mishandling of protected government information. This is no longer just a scandal about high society associations. It has transformed into a serious matter of public office integrity and the handling of state secrets. When a member of a royal household acts as an official representative for national trade and economic interests, their responsibilities are bound by the strict laws of public trust and confidentiality. The core of the current crisis lies in the allegation that these boundaries were completely ignored and that sensitive data was treated as personal currency to be shared with private business contacts. What makes the situation particularly critical now is the discovery that evidence of these actions was compiled, organized, and physically delivered to the gates of the palace years ago. The question that now looms over the entire institution is what exactly happened to that information once it crossed the royal threshold, and why it took a formal police intervention to bring these matters into the light. For years, observers of the monarchy have noted a distinct pattern of behavior when dealing with internal controversies, a strategy often described as quiet containment. This method involves removing individuals from public-facing duties, stripping away ceremonial titles, and encouraging a quiet retirement away from the spotlight, all in the hope that public memory will naturally fade. But a strategy designed for personal scandals completely falls apart when faced with allegations of statutory misconduct and criminal investigations conducted by external law enforcement agencies. The transition from a managed internal royal issue to an active police inquiry represents a profound shift in how this crisis must be handled by the current monarch and his advisors. The atmosphere inside the palace is described by insiders as increasingly tense, as officials realize that the traditional methods of institutional defense may no longer be sufficient against an independent legal process. The public is left wondering how much was known, when it was known, and who made the ultimate decision to remain silent while serious allegations remained unaddressed. This opening chapter of the controversy is not just about the individual who allegedly broke the rules, but about the entire system that surrounded him, protected him, and managed his public exit from society. It highlights a profound disconnect between the strict standards of accountability expected of ordinary citizens and the exceptional latitude historically granted to those born into immense power. As the details of the thousands of messages begin to surface through legal filings and media investigations, the narrative of a sudden, unexpected arrest is quickly being replaced by a much darker story of long-term awareness and deliberate institutional delay. The viewers are invited to look past the ceremonial glamour of the monarchy and focus on the cold, hard facts of the legal documents that are currently rewriting the modern history of the royal family. Every document that emerges adds another layer of gravity to the situation, transforming a familiar public relations headache into an institutional crisis of historical proportions. The sense of momentum building behind this case suggests that the coming weeks will bring even greater scrutiny to the doors of the royal household, forcing a public reckoning that has been avoided for nearly a decade. In this report, we will carefully trace the path of the hidden evidence, examine the specific roles played by senior palace officials, and look at the immense pressure currently facing the modern crown as it attempts to navigate an active criminal investigation. The story represents a critical test for the contemporary monarchy, forcing it to choose between the ancient impulse to protect its own and the modern necessity to demonstrate absolute transparency under the law. As we move forward into the specific findings of the recent investigation, the true scale of the hidden archive reveals a pattern of behavior that challenges the very foundation of public trust in the state. The hidden reality behind the closed doors of the royal household began to fracture in a spectacular fashion when the specific details of a massive digital archive finally became public knowledge. The true core of the current crisis involves a staggering collection of 30,000 electronic messages that were completely pulled from the personal business archives of a close financial associate. According to authoritative public service broadcasting reports, this enormous treasure trove of communications was not hidden in a remote server, but was explicitly and formally delivered to the Lord Chamberlain, who serves as the most senior administrative officer within the entire royal household apparatus. This crucial transfer of information did not happen yesterday. It occurred 6 years ago, in the year 2020, revealing that the highest levels of the monarchy were holding a ticking legal time bomb while the public remained entirely in the dark. The contents of these 30,000 messages reportedly contained direct, undeniable evidence that confidential government information was being systematically shared with unauthorized individuals outside of the state infrastructure. This sensitive data was allegedly handled as personal currency during a period when the individual in question was actively operating as an official international trade envoy for the United Kingdom. The gravity of using a public diplomatic position to distribute protected state documents cannot be overstated, as it strikes at the absolute foundation of national security and administrative integrity. The timeline demonstrates that for over half a decade, the highest administrative authority of the crown sat on a mountain of digital evidence that pointed directly towards serious misconduct in public office. This long period of institutional silence has created an immense wave of public tension and legal pressure, especially following the dramatic events that unfolded earlier this year. In February, the 66-year-old former prince was formally arrested by law enforcement officials on direct suspicion of misconduct in public office, a criminal charge that carries severe legal penalties and deep historical shame. The specific focus of the police investigation centers on the highly illegal forwarding of confidential international trade documents to the notorious and late financier Jeffrey Epstein. While the accused has consistently and completely denied all criminal accusations leveled against him, the existence of the 30,000 emails handed to the palace 6 years ago completely changes the public and legal narrative. It suggests that the arrest was not the beginning of the discovery, but rather the inevitable explosion of a crisis that the royal institution had desperately tried to contain within its own private walls. The revelation of this massive archive has given a powerful and furious voice to the individuals who were harmed by this elite network of power and privilege. Jess Michaels, a prominent victim of the late Jeffrey Epstein, came forward to speak directly with national print media, delivering a blistering and direct accusation against the administrative core of the monarchy. She stated with absolute clarity that 6 years ago, the palace did not just view the former prince as a mere public relations problem or a social embarrassment, but explicitly knew that he was facing the very real prospect of a serious criminal investigation. In her emotional and biting testimony, Michaels pointed out that the institution chose to sit on the evidence, effectively protecting a powerful individual while completely ignoring the broader legal and moral implications of his actions. As a former professional dancer who was sexually assaulted by Epstein in 1991, when she was just 22 years old, Michaels spoke with the heavy authority of someone who has spent decades fighting against institutional walls of silence. Her public statements also served as a powerful and deeply moving defense of the late Virginia Giuffre, who was the primary individual to accuse both Epstein and the former prince of systematic sexual abuse when she was still a vulnerable minor. In a tragic turn of events that has added an immense layer of grief and urgency to the current legal proceedings, Virginia Giuffre died by suicide in April of the year 2025. The fact that Giuffre did not live to see the formal police arrest or the public exposure of the palace archives has become a central point of moral outrage for campaigners and victims worldwide. Michaels emphasized that the palace's long-term strategy of protecting the royal status meant intentionally casting doubt on the testimonies of vulnerable victims who were telling the absolute truth. The heartbreaking reality that a primary accuser passed away before seeing any form of institutional admission or legal accountability has intensified the demands for total transparency from the modern British state. The current situation perfectly illustrates what independent observers describe as the classic behavior of deeply entrenched institutions, which historically prioritize the preservation of their own power and the protection of influential men over the protection of the public. This structural defense mechanism leaves the individuals who were severely harmed to carry the heavy emotional and physical burden of their trauma completely alone, while the machinery of the state operates to delay the legal consequences. When independent media organizations reached out directly to the administrative offices of the palace to get an immediate response regarding the 30,000 hidden emails, the reaction from the royal household was a masterclass in legal stonewalling. The palace officials completely declined to provide an immediate or substantial response to the direct inquiries from the press. Instead, the royal household issued a brief, formally constrained statement to public broadcasters, noting that since there is an active and ongoing police inquiry concerning the individual under his legal family name of Mr. Mountbatten Windsor, it is legally impossible to provide any specific comment on these matters. This standard legal shield, while practically necessary during an active criminal prosecution, does very little to address the broader ethical question of why 30,000 emails were kept silent within the palace infrastructure for 6 long years before a law enforcement agency finally took action. The contrast between the current silence and the formal statements made at the time of the arrest highlights the immense internal conflict gripping the contemporary monarchy. In February, immediately after the shocking news of the arrest broke across global news networks, the 77-year-old King Charles issued a formal statement reflecting deep institutional concern. The reigning monarch stated that he had learned with the deepest possible concern the news regarding the criminal suspicion of misconduct in public office surrounding his brother. King Charles further asserted that what must follow now is a full, fair, and completely proper legal process by which this immense issue is investigated in the most appropriate manner by the competent external authorities. The king emphasized that the modern law enforcement agencies have the full and wholehearted support and cooperation of the Crown in this matter. However, this public pledge of absolute cooperation is now being viewed through a highly critical lens, as the public demands to know if that same wholehearted cooperation existed back in 2020, when the Lord Chamberlain first received the physical digital evidence of the trade document leaks. The legal reality of an ongoing police investigation means that every single administrative decision made by palace officials over the last decade will be thoroughly cross-examined by independent investigators. The 30,000 emails represent a direct physical link between official state commerce, royal privilege, and an international criminal network that operated with impunity for decades. As the legal teams dig deeper into the electronic files, the tension within the administrative offices of the Crown continues to rise, as they face the reality that ancient institutional structures cannot easily deflect modern digital forensics and statutory criminal law. The culmination of this long-running institutional crisis forces a profound examination of the individuals involved, their complicated backgrounds, and the immense structural implications for the modern British state. To understand the full weight of this legal reckoning, one must look closely at the biography of the man at the absolute center of the storm. Born in 1960 as the second son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, the 66-year-old former prince spent the majority of his adult life operating within a unique cocoon of royal privilege, military distinction, and diplomatic responsibility. Following his service as a helicopter pilot in the Falklands conflict, he was eventually appointed as the United Kingdom's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment in the year 2001. It was during this decade-long tenure as a global trade envoy that the foundations for the current criminal charges were allegedly laid. This official role granted him unfettered access to highly sensitive government documents, industrial strategies, and confidential diplomatic briefing papers designed exclusively to advance British economic interests abroad. The core of the current criminal allegation of misconduct in public office is that these protected state secrets were treated not as sacred public trusts, but as leverage to maintain standing within an ultra-wealthy, international social circle that included the late Jeffrey Epstein. The contrast between his royal birthright and the cold reality of a contemporary police cell marks one of the most astonishing downfalls in the modern history of the British state, proving that even the most deeply entrenched status can be dismantled when administrative secrets leak into the public domain. The historical context of this downfall is inextricably linked to the dark legacy of Jeffrey Epstein, the American financier whose vast network of influence compromised high-profile figures across politics, business, and academia globally. Epstein, who died in a Manhattan federal prison cell in 2019 while awaiting trial on extensive sex trafficking charges, had spent decades cultivating relationships with powerful individuals, utilizing wealth and luxury properties to create an environment where illegal activities could be systematically shielded from law enforcement. The ongoing police investigation into the former prince suggests that the relationship between the royal envoy and the American financier was not merely social, but involved a highly inappropriate exchange of official state commerce data. By allegedly forwarding confidential trade documents to Epstein, the former prince is accused of violating the explicit statutory boundaries of his public office, effectively using state machinery for private networking. This connection highlights the dangerous intersection of unregulated global wealth and traditional state power, demonstrating how easily sovereign secrets can be compromised when elite figures operate without rigorous, independent oversight. The collateral damage of this prolonged cover-up extends far beyond institutional reputations, carrying a heavy human cost that continues to resonate through the testimonies of the survivors. The tragic death of Virginia Giuffre in April of the year 2025 remains a powerful and painful catalyst for the current demands for total accountability. Giuffre was for years the public face of the resistance against the elite network, bravely detailing how she was trafficked to powerful men while still an underage minor. Her sudden and tragic passing by suicide occurred just 10 months before law enforcement officials finally took the decisive step of arresting the former prince in February. This painful timeline has galvanized advocacy groups and legal representatives who argue that the palace's 6-year delay in addressing the 30,000 emails actively prolonged the suffering of those seeking justice. The late Virginia Giuffre did not survive to witness the formal arrest or the exposure of the massive digital archive that had been delivered to the Lord Chamberlain back in 2020. This stark reality has intensified the public scrutiny on the royal household, transforming the legal defense into a broader moral debate about institutional cruelty and the deliberate silencing of vulnerable voices to protect powerful men. As the criminal case moves forward through the British judicial system, the broader operational consequences for the monarchy under King Charles VII are becoming increasingly severe. The reigning monarch faces the monumental task of preserving the stability and moral authority of a centuries-old institution while simultaneously managing an active, unprecedented criminal prosecution within his immediate family. King Charles's public declaration of full and wholehearted cooperation with law enforcement agencies represents a deliberate attempt to modernize the Crown's approach to accountability, signaling a stark departure from the quiet containment strategies utilized in previous decades. However, the revelation that the palace administrative apparatus was in possession of the 30,000 emails for 6 years before the arrest complicates this narrative of transparency. Legal experts point out that the investigation will inevitably demand access to internal palace communications, administrative logs, and testimonies from senior courtiers, including the former and current Lord Chamberlains who managed the household operations during this prolonged period of silence. The boundaries of royal prerogative and executive privilege will be tested to their absolute limits as independent prosecutors seek to determine exactly who authorized the retention of the evidence and why it was never forwarded to the Metropolitan Police or National Security Services at the moment of its receipt in 2020. The wider public reaction across the United Kingdom and the international community reflects a profound shift in societal attitudes toward traditional authorities and elite privilege. The days when royal scandals could be quietly managed through internal exile and the stripping of ceremonial military titles are completely gone. In the modern digital era, public demand for equal treatment under the statutory law is absolute, and the spectacle of a senior member of the royal family facing charges of misconduct in public office challenges the very concept of institutional exceptionalism. The outcome of this criminal investigation will establish a major historical precedent regarding the legal accountability of public officials, regardless of their lineage or proximity to the throne. It serves as a stark reminder that public offices and diplomatic appointments